Everyone believed it was just a tragic accident, except one father. When his wife fell down the stairs after a private confrontation with their daughter-in-law, his own son defended the woman without hesitation. But hidden evidence, buried secrets, and one unexpected witness would expose a betrayal that shattered an entire family forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping family drama stories with shocking twists. The night my son insisted everything was just an accident, I already knew someone inside my family was hiding the truth. I didn't have proof. I didn't have witnesses willing to stand beside me. But after 63 years of life, I had learned to trust the quiet details everyone else ignored. Sometimes the loudest lie is the one everyone accepts without asking a single question. My name is Kaylin Veermont. I spent more than 40 years working as a structural engineer, designing bridges and public buildings across 3 states. My career taught me that every structure tells the truth if you know where to look. Cracks never appear without pressure. Failures never happen without a cause. People I eventually discovered are no different. My wife Eloan had been by my side for 40 years. She possessed a calm personality that balanced my tendency to analyze everything. While I worried about problems before they appeared, she believed kindness solved most disagreements. It was one of the reasons everyone loved her. Friends often said she made every room feel warmer simply by entering it. She always laughed at that compliment because she believed she was completely ordinary. 2 years ago, we decided to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary by inviting our closest friends and relatives to our lakeside home. The house overlooked calm water surrounded by tall oak trees. It wasn't luxurious, but every corner held memories. Our son Rowan had learned to ride his first bicycle in the driveway. Eloan planted the flower garden herself. I built the wooden dock with my own hands nearly 25 years earlier. Every room reminded us of another chapter in our lives. Preparations began early that Saturday morning. Eloan supervised the caterers while I arranged tables in the backyard. The weather could not have been better. Clear skies reflected across the lake, and a gentle breeze kept the summer afternoon comfortable. Around 4 o'clock, guests began arriving. Old neighbors hugged us. Former coworkers shared stories from decades ago. Laughter echoed through the house before dinner had even started. Then Rowan arrived with his wife, Seraphine Dalcroft. At first glance, Seraphine seemed impossible to dislike. She greeted everyone with perfect manners, remembered names effortlessly, and complimented nearly every guest before they even sat down. She carried herself with confidence without appearing arrogant. During the first years of their marriage, I believed Rowan had found someone who genuinely loved him. Over time, however, I began noticing small moments that others overlooked. Whenever someone praised another person, Seraphine somehow redirected the conversation back to herself. If a guest admired Eloan's cooking, Seraphine mentioned expensive restaurants she had recently visited. If someone complimented our home, she casually talked about modern houses she hoped to buy someday. None of those moments were serious enough to start an argument. They simply left an uncomfortable feeling I couldn't explain. That evening those moments happened more often. During dinner, one guest thanked Eloan for organizing such a beautiful celebration. Before Eloan could answer, Seraphine smiled and said, "She asked me for several decorating ideas. I'm happy everything turned out so nicely." That wasn't true. Eloan had planned every detail herself. She simply smiled and allowed the conversation to continue. About 20 minutes later, another guest admired the flower arrangements on each table. Again, Seraphine interrupted. "I suggested using those colors. They make photographs look much better." Another lie. Again, Eloan stayed silent. I noticed my wife avoiding conflict the way she always had. She disliked embarrassing anyone, especially during family gatherings. I admired that quality, but sometimes I wished she would defend herself. As sunset approached, everyone moved from the dining room onto the back patio overlooking the lake. Soft music played through outdoor speakers while guests enjoyed coffee and dessert. Rowan laughed with several cousins near the fire pit. Children chased each other across the lawn. For a while, the evening appeared perfect. Then I noticed Seraphine quietly leave the patio and walk back inside the house. She glanced over her shoulder before disappearing through the hallway. At the time, I assumed she had gone upstairs to answer a phone call or freshen up. A minute later, Eloane excused herself from a conversation and followed the same path into the house. I watched her disappear through the sliding glass door. Something about the timing caught my attention. Not because it seemed suspicious, because it felt deliberate. Without realizing why, I checked my watch. 7:43. Less than 30 seconds passed. Then another 30. Conversations continued outside. Nobody else seemed concerned. I was about to stand up when a sharp crashing sound exploded from inside the house. The music suddenly felt distant. Every conversation stopped. Someone dropped a glass onto the patio. Before anyone could react, I was already running toward the front hallway. I had no idea that the next few seconds would permanently change the future of my family. By the time I reached the staircase, a crowd had already gathered in the entrance hall. Several guests stood frozen in place, staring upward with expressions of shock. Others whispered nervously, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. The cheerful atmosphere that had filled our home only moments earlier disappeared as if it had never existed. My wife Eloane lay halfway down the staircase. One hand clutched the wooden railing while the other pressed against her wrist. Her breathing was uneven, and I could immediately tell she was trying to hide how much pain she was in. A decorative vase near the bottom step had shattered across the floor, leaving pieces of glass scattered everywhere. I rushed to her side. "Eloane," I said, kneeling beside her. "Don't try to move." She looked directly into my eyes. For a brief moment, I expected her to explain what had happened. Instead, she quietly whispered, "I'm all right." She wasn't. I had seen enough workplace injuries during my engineering career to recognize the signs. Her left wrist was already swelling, and the awkward angle of her arm suggested a fracture. Before I could ask another question, Rowan hurried through the crowd. "Dad," he said quickly, raising both hands as if trying to calm everyone at once. "It was just an accident. Mom slipped." His words came too fast. Too prepared. I slowly looked up the staircase. Seraphine stood near the top landing. One hand covered her mouth. The other rested dramatically against the wall. Her expression suggested complete horror. She even appeared close to tears. "I'm so sorry," she said with a trembling voice. "I tried to catch her, but everything happened so quickly." Several guests immediately comforted her. "It's not your fault. These stairs can be dangerous. Anyone could have fallen." I remained silent. Instead of looking at Seraphine, I looked at the staircase itself. Years earlier, I had personally redesigned every step during a home renovation. Each stair included an anti-slip rubber strip attached near the front edge. I knew every measurement because I had installed them myself. As my eyes traveled upward, something caught my attention. One stair looked different. The rubber strip was missing. Not damaged. Missing. A clean rectangular space remained where it should have been. Most people would never notice. I did. "Call an ambulance," I said firmly. One of our neighbors immediately reached for his phone. While everyone focused on Eloane, I quietly walked toward the staircase. Halfway up, I crouched beside the missing strip. There were faint adhesive marks. Fresh ones. Someone had removed it recently. I touched the surface with 2 fingers. The glue hadn't fully hardened. Whoever pulled it away had done so only minutes earlier. Behind me, Rowan spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Dad, don't overthink this. Mom simply lost her balance." I stood slowly before turning toward him. "I haven't said what I think happened." For a split second, Rowan looked uncomfortable. Then his expression returned to normal. "I just mean accidents happen." His explanation sounded reasonable. Yet something about his tone bothered me more than his words. It sounded less like concern, and more like a conclusion he desperately wanted everyone else to accept. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. Paramedics carefully stabilized Eloane before placing her onto a stretcher. As they carried her toward the front door, she reached for my hand. "Please," she whispered softly, "don't make a scene tonight." I squeezed her hand gently. "I'll worry about that later." She gave me a weak smile before the ambulance doors closed. Most of our guests quietly left soon afterward. Many apologized for how the evening had ended. Several hugged Rowan. Others comforted Seraphine. Nearly everyone repeated the same sentence before leaving. "What a terrible accident." Only one person avoided speaking altogether. our longtime housekeeper Mireya Salvin. As she collected broken pieces of glass from the hallway floor, I noticed her repeatedly glancing toward the staircase. She looked frightened. Not surprised. Frightened. When our eyes finally met, she quickly lowered her head and continued cleaning without saying a word. That reaction stayed with me long after everyone else had gone home. Later that night, I sat alone in the empty living room after returning from the hospital. Doctors confirmed Aloan had fractured her wrist but would recover completely with time. I should have felt relieved. Instead, my attention kept returning to that single missing rubber strip. I retrieved the home's maintenance records from my office drawer. The staircase had been inspected only 3 months earlier. Every safety strip had been intact. No repairs. No replacements. No damage. Someone had deliberately removed one before dinner. That wasn't the only detail bothering me. I replayed the evening inside my mind again and again. Seraphine disappeared upstairs first. Aloan followed shortly afterward. Less than a minute later she fell. The sequence felt too precise to ignore. As midnight approached, I walked back to the staircase one final time. Standing in complete silence, I looked toward the upper hallway where Seraphine had been standing after the fall. I couldn't explain why. But for the first time in my life, I questioned whether someone inside my own family had planned everything from the very beginning. The next morning began in complete silence. Normally, Aloan filled our kitchen with the sound of coffee brewing before sunrise, humming softly while opening the curtains to let the morning light spill across the room. That morning, the house felt unfamiliar. Every room reminded me that she was recovering in a hospital bed, instead of sitting across from me with a warm smile. I arrived at the hospital shortly after 8 o'clock. Aloan looked tired but alert. Her left wrist rested inside a temporary cast, and several bruises had already darkened along her forearm and shoulder. The doctor assured me she would make a full recovery within a few months, but I was far less concerned about broken bones than I was about the questions nobody seemed willing to answer. I pulled a chair beside her bed. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" I asked gently. She looked toward the window instead of meeting my eyes. I slipped. "You've walked those stairs thousands of times. It only takes one mistake." Her answer sounded calm, but it didn't sound natural. I leaned forward. "Aloan." She finally looked at me. There was fear in her eyes. Not fear of falling. Fear of saying too much. "Please," she whispered. "Just let it go." Those 4 words unsettled me more than anything that had happened the previous night. She wasn't asking because she believed it had been an accident. She was asking because she wanted something hidden. Before I could continue, Rowan entered the room carrying flowers. His smile looked forced. He hugged his mother carefully before turning toward me. "Dad, I know you're worried." "I am. But the doctors already said she'll recover." I wasn't talking about her injuries. His expression tightened almost immediately. For several uncomfortable seconds neither of us spoke. Finally he sighed. "I've already told everyone what happened." "I know. So why keep questioning it?" "Because your explanation came before anyone asked for one." He looked away. I panicked. "Did you?" He nodded. "I didn't want people blaming Seraphine." That answer caught my attention. I never mentioned blaming her. Another brief silence followed. Rowan rubbed the back of his neck before quietly saying he needed to make a phone call. Within seconds he left the room. Aloan watched him leave. Then she closed her eyes. I realized neither of them wanted this conversation to continue. After leaving the hospital, I drove straight home. The celebration decorations still covered parts of the backyard. Half-empty flower arrangements sat on the tables, and folded chairs remained scattered across the lawn. The entire property looked like a party that had ended in the middle of a sentence. Inside the house, I walked directly toward the staircase. The missing anti-slip strip still bothered me. This time I brought a flashlight and a small inspection mirror from my workshop. Kneeling beside the damaged step, I carefully examined every inch of the wood. Tiny scratches ran along both sides of the adhesive. Someone hadn't peeled the strip away by hand. A thin metal tool had been used. Probably a scraper. That discovery ruled out ordinary wear. The strip had been intentionally removed. As I stood, I noticed another detail. Near the edge of the staircase rested something almost invisible against the polished wood. A tiny silver fastening clip. It didn't belong to the staircase. I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps it meant everything. A few hours later, our longtime housekeeper, Mireya Salvin, arrived to finish cleaning after the party. She had worked for our family for nearly 18 years. Quiet, dependable, and observant, she often noticed things others ignored. As she dusted the living room shelves, I asked casually, "Did you happen to see anything unusual before Eloan fell?" She froze. Only for a second. Then she continued dusting. "No, sir. You don't sound convinced." She kept her eyes on the shelf. "I don't want trouble. I'm not asking you to accuse anyone." Another long pause followed. Finally, she placed the cloth down. "I saw Mrs. Seraphine go upstairs." "I know." A little later, Mrs. Eloan followed. "I know that too." Mireya swallowed nervously. "I was bringing fresh towels to the guest room when I heard raised voices. That immediately caught my attention. What were they arguing about?" "I couldn't hear every word." "What did you hear?" Mireya hesitated once more before answering. Mrs. Seraphine kept repeating one sentence. "What sentence?" "Give it to me before he finds out." I felt my heartbeat quicken. What was she asking for? "I don't know." "And Eloan?" She said no several times. My mind raced through dozens of possibilities. Money, jewelry, documents, family secrets. None of them seemed to fit. What happened next? I asked. I walked away because I didn't think it was my business. She lowered her voice even further. About 30 seconds later. "The crash," I finished. She nodded. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then Mireya looked directly at me for the first time. "I don't know whether Mrs. Seraphine caused your wife's fall." She paused. "But I know one thing." "What?" That wasn't a normal conversation. After she left for the day, I searched every room upstairs, hoping to discover what Seraphine had wanted so badly. Most rooms revealed nothing unusual. Until I entered the guest bedroom. Inside the closet, partially hidden beneath an extra blanket, lay a torn brown envelope. It looked as though someone had opened it in a hurry and forgotten one piece behind. Inside remained several photocopied pages. The first page carried my full name. The second listed property valuations. The third contained legal language discussing ownership transfers and estate planning. I stared at the papers in disbelief. Months earlier, Rowan had casually suggested transferring our lake house into his name, claiming it would simplify future inheritance issues. I had politely refused. Now I held documents proving someone had continued working on those plans without my knowledge. As I gathered the papers into the envelope, one question echoed louder than every other. If this argument had really been about property, why had Seraphine been desperate enough to confront Eloan in private only minutes before she fell? I spent most of that evening sitting alone in my study, reading the documents from the torn envelope again and again. They were only photocopies, but they revealed far more than I had expected. Someone had contacted a legal office about transferring ownership of our lake house through a trust. The paperwork wasn't complete because my signature was missing, but every other section had already been prepared. Whoever arranged those documents believed they would eventually convince me to sign them. The strange part was not the paperwork itself. It was the date. The first draft had been created almost 6 months before our anniversary dinner. That meant this had never been a sudden idea. Someone had been planning something for a very long time. The following morning, I decided not to confront Rowan or Seraphine. If they were hiding something, an accusation without proof would only encourage them to cover their tracks more carefully. Instead, I chose to observe. For the next several days, I visited Eloan at the hospital every afternoon before returning home. She slowly regained her strength, but every time I mentioned the argument upstairs, she found a reason to change the subject. Sometimes she asked about the garden. Sometimes she wanted updates about neighbors. Once she even started discussing an old vacation we had taken 20 years earlier. She was avoiding one subject on purpose. That alone convinced me the truth was much larger than a simple disagreement over property. 3 days later, Eloan finally returned home. Our family doctor instructed her to avoid carrying heavy objects and to rest her injured wrist for several weeks. That evening, while she slept upstairs, I quietly searched my office for any documents connected to the unfinished property transfer. Instead, I found something else. A small notebook where I kept records of my engineering projects. Most of the pages contained ordinary calculations from jobs I had completed years ago. But one section had been removed. Several pages were missing. At first I assumed I had misplaced them. Then I remembered. Those pages contained notes from an unfinished bridge stabilization system I had designed shortly before retirement. The project had never been published because I accepted early retirement before filing the final patent application. Very few people even knew those notes existed. Suddenly Mireya's words echoed inside my mind. Give it to me before he finds out. Perhaps Seraphine hadn't been asking about the house at all. Perhaps she wanted something completely different. The possibility seemed unbelievable. Until the next morning. While organizing old storage boxes in the basement, I noticed one cabinet standing slightly open. Inside were dozens of engineering binders arranged alphabetically. Everything appeared untouched except for one empty space. A leather notebook was missing. My heartbeat immediately quickened. I searched every shelf twice. Then a third time. The notebook was gone. Fortunately, I remembered exactly who had it. Nearly 2 years earlier, I had handed the original notebook to Aloan for safekeeping, because I planned to organize my papers after retirement. She often stored valuable documents in places nobody would think to search. If Seraphine knew about that notebook, then her argument with Aloan suddenly made perfect sense. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital archives to collect copies of Aloan's admission paperwork. While waiting near the reception desk, I unexpectedly saw Rowan walking through the main entrance. He wasn't visiting his mother. He was carrying a large envelope addressed to a private legal consulting firm located downtown. Curious, I stayed far enough behind that he wouldn't notice me. Instead of entering the patient elevators, Rowan met Seraphine inside the hospital cafe. They sat together in the far corner where few people were paying attention. I couldn't hear every word. The cafe was too crowded. But I clearly saw Seraphine slide the envelope across the table. Rowan looked nervous. She looked irritated. After opening the envelope, Rowan shook his head. He spoke for nearly a minute. Seraphine interrupted him repeatedly before pointing toward the parking lot. Finally, Rowan placed both hands over his face. It looked less like a conversation between husband and wife, and more like someone receiving instructions. When they stood to leave, Rowan carried the envelope while Seraphine walked ahead without looking back. I remained seated for another 5 minutes before quietly following them outside. By the time I reached the parking area, their vehicle had already disappeared. On the drive home, I replayed the scene repeatedly. If the envelope contained legal papers, why meet at the hospital instead of a lawyer's office? If Rowan truly believed his mother's fall had been an accident, why did he appear so anxious every time Seraphine spoke? The answers continued slipping further away. That evening, another unexpected visitor arrived at my front door. It was Mireya. She looked more frightened than I had ever seen her. I almost didn't come, she admitted quietly. What happened? She glanced over her shoulder before stepping inside. I remembered something from the anniversary. I waited without interrupting. The argument upstairs wasn't the first one. What do you mean? Earlier that afternoon, before any guests arrived, I saw Mrs. Seraphine searching your study. My expression hardened. Searching for what? I don't know. But after she came out, she asked me a very strange question. What did she ask? Mireya took a slow breath before answering. She asked whether your old engineering notebooks were still inside the house. In that moment, every scattered piece of the puzzle finally began moving toward the same place. The property documents had been a distraction. The missing notebook was the real target. And someone inside my own family believed it was valuable enough to risk everything. After Mireya left, I locked every door in the house and sat alone in my study until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. For days I had chased scattered clues that refused to fit together. Now, for the first time, a clear pattern was beginning to emerge. Seraphine had not been obsessed with inheriting our home. The property documents had simply created a believable distraction. Her real interest had always been the engineering notebook that only Aloan and I knew existed. The question that remained was painfully simple. How had she learned about it? The next morning, I drove to the hospital earlier than usual. Eloan had another appointment to examine the progress of her wrist, and I decided it was finally time to stop protecting her from difficult conversations. After the doctor finished the examination and left the room, I closed the door. "We need to talk," I said quietly. She immediately understood. Her shoulders tensed before I had even asked the first question. "I found the property papers." She nodded without surprise. "I know. I also know they weren't what Seraphine wanted." She lowered her eyes. I reached into my briefcase and placed one of my old engineering sketches on the bedside table. "She was looking for this project, wasn't she?" Eloan remained silent for several long seconds. Finally she whispered, "She wanted the notebook." I took a slow breath. So it really was about the notebook. Tears gathered in her eyes. "A few months ago, Seraphine overheard us talking about your unfinished bridge design. She asked harmless questions afterward. I didn't think anything of it. And then she started asking whether you planned to patent it." I remembered those conversations. At the time they had seemed like ordinary curiosity. "They weren't ordinary questions," Eloan continued. "She kept asking how much the design might be worth if someone completed the patent." I slowly sat beside her bed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I hoped she would lose interest." She shook her head. "I was wrong." Her voice became quieter. "On the night of our anniversary, she cornered me upstairs. She demanded the notebook. She said keeping it hidden was selfish because Rowan deserved opportunities too." "What did you tell her?" "I said the notebook belonged to you. And then I refused to tell her where I had hidden it." The room fell silent. Neither of us wanted to say what both of us were already thinking. Eventually I asked the question that mattered most. "Did she push you?" Eloan closed her eyes. "No." "Did she touch you?" "No." I frowned. "Then how did you fall?" She looked directly at me. When I turned away from her, I stepped onto the staircase. She paused. The anti-slip strip was gone. My jaw tightened. I tried grabbing the railing. Her injured hand trembled slightly. There wasn't enough time. Everything suddenly made sense. Seraphine hadn't needed to push Eloan. Removing the safety strip had created the danger before the confrontation even began. If Eloan hurried away after refusing her demands, the staircase itself would do the rest. That afternoon I returned home determined to find proof that no one could dismiss. The first place I checked was our security system. Months earlier I had installed indoor cameras covering the main hallway, the front entrance, and the staircase. If they had recorded the incident, the investigation would be over. Inside my office, I opened the security software. The timeline immediately revealed something unusual. Camera recordings ended precisely 2 hours before our anniversary dinner began. No hardware failure. No power outage. Someone had manually disabled the system. I searched the administrator log. Every security change required a personal access code. The final login appeared on the screen. User: Rowan Veermont. Time: 5:41 p.m. Nearly 2 hours before Eloan fell. I stared at the monitor in disbelief. Rowan had turned off every indoor camera. Perhaps he had not known why Seraphine wanted them disabled. Perhaps he had simply trusted his wife. Either possibility left one painful truth. Without his actions, everything would have been recorded. I immediately called him. He answered after the third ring. "Dad, I need to ask you something." "Sure. Why did you disable my security cameras before dinner?" Complete silence. Several seconds passed before he finally spoke. "Who told you that?" "The system log." Another long pause followed. "It wasn't a big deal." "Then explain it." Seraphine thought guests might feel uncomfortable being recorded during a family celebration. "So you turned off every camera." "It was only for one evening. You never asked me." "I didn't think you'd mind." His explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but something inside his voice had changed. He sounded frightened, not defensive. Frightened. "Did you know what Seraphine planned upstairs?" "No." The answer came immediately. Too immediately. "I swear I didn't." "But you knew she wanted the cameras off." "Ah, yes." "Why?" Another silence. When Rowan finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "She told me she wanted to discuss something private with Mom." What kind of private discussion? I don't know. You're lying. No. Then why are you afraid? I heard him breathing heavily through the phone. I made a terrible mistake. Before I could ask another question, the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. For the first time since the anniversary, I became certain of one thing. Rowan might not have planned the attack. But he knew far more than he had ever admitted. I barely slept after my phone call with Rowan. His final words repeated inside my mind until sunrise. I made a terrible mistake. He hadn't denied disabling the cameras. He hadn't denied helping Seraphine. Most importantly, he hadn't sounded like a man protecting his innocence. He sounded like someone who had finally realized the consequences of trusting the wrong person. The following afternoon, while Aloan rested at home, an unexpected knock echoed through our front door. Standing outside was our neighbor's grandson, Kieran Voss. He was 17 years old, polite, and unusually interested in photography. Every weekend he experimented with drones, recording cinematic videos of the lake, nearby forests, and sunsets across the shoreline. I had spoken with him several times over the years, mostly about cameras and engineering because he hoped to study mechanical design after graduating from high school. He held a small black carrying case under one arm. "Mr. Veermont," he said nervously, "I think I should show you something." I invited him inside. Once we sat in the living room, he placed a memory card on the coffee table. "I wasn't sure if this mattered," he admitted. "After hearing about Mrs. Veermont's accident, I remembered I was flying my drone that evening. My attention sharpened immediately." "The anniversary?" He nodded. "I was recording the lake at sunset." I frowned. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" He looked embarrassed. "I realized part of the flight passed near your second-floor windows. I thought it might have invaded your privacy, so I almost deleted it." "What changed your mind?" "I watched it first." Without another word, he handed me his tablet. I opened the video. The recording began over the water exactly as he described. The drone slowly crossed the lake before climbing higher toward our property. The image remained remarkably stable. Guests could be seen laughing on the patio below while children ran across the backyard. Then the drone drifted toward the side of the house. The upstairs hallway windows entered the frame. There was no audio, only crystal clear video. My heartbeat accelerated. Inside the hallway stood Aloan and Seraphine. They were facing one another only a few feet from the staircase. Seraphine spoke first. Her gestures were sharp and impatient. Aloan shook her head repeatedly. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Before continuing the argument, Seraphine crouched beside the staircase. She reached toward the edge of one step. Using a small metal tool, she peeled away the anti-slip strip. She looked toward Aloan. Then she stepped aside. She pointed toward the staircase while continuing the argument. Aloan turned to leave. She took one step, then another. Her foot landed exactly where the safety strip had been removed. She slipped instantly. She reached for the railing. Missed. Her body twisted before she crashed down several steps. Seraphine never attempted to catch her. Instead, she remained completely still for nearly 2 full seconds. Only after realizing people downstairs had heard the fall did she suddenly begin waving her arms and pretending to panic. The recording ended as the drone turned back toward the lake. I watched it again. Then a third time. Every doubt I had carried since our anniversary disappeared. This had never been an accident. It had been a carefully prepared trap. I slowly looked at Kieran. "You've shown this to no one else?" He shook his head. "I came here first." I stood and extended my hand. "You may have just saved my family from living with a lie forever." His face showed both relief and concern. "I didn't want to get involved. I understand. But after watching it..." He paused. "I knew Mrs. Veermont deserved the truth." Within an hour I contacted Detective Helena Cross, the investigator assigned to what had originally been classified as an accidental injury. She arrived that evening. Kieran transferred the original drone footage directly from the memory card. The detective carefully examined every frame before requesting copies of my security system logs, the property documents, and the maintenance records showing the staircase had been intact only months earlier. When she finished reviewing everything, she closed her notebook. "Mr. Veermont," she said calmly, "this changes the entire investigation. The following morning, Rowan called me repeatedly. I didn't answer. Instead, I sent him one message. I know the truth. Less than 20 minutes later, he appeared outside my front door. His eyes were red from crying. He looked exhausted. The confident young man who had defended his wife only days earlier was gone. I need to explain, he whispered. I opened the door but did not invite him inside. You can explain later. His voice trembled. I didn't know she was going to do that. But you helped her anyway. I thought she only wanted privacy. You disabled every camera in my house. I know. You defended her before anyone asked what happened. He lowered his head. I know. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. Then police vehicles turned onto our street. Rowan looked behind him. The color drained from his face. Detective Cross stepped out of the lead vehicle holding a warrant. She walked directly toward the front steps. Mr. Rowan Veermont, she said evenly, we need to ask you several questions regarding the events of your parents' anniversary. At that moment, Rowan finally understood that protecting one lie had placed every remaining part of his life in danger.